Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a story was part myth, part musical history, and just incredibly personal.
Yeah, it's the saga of Brian Wilson, the genius behind the Beach Boys.
Exactly. And his legendary lost album, Smile, plus this amazing journey through, well, genius, struggle, and ultimately comeback.
We've looked at the sources you send over. There's an article on mental health recovery, some really fascinating details from the Library of Congress about pet sounds, and then a ton of information on Smile itself from Wikipedia.
Yeah, lots to unpack. So our goal here is to really pull out the key pieces. We want to understand the huge ambition behind Smile, why it all kind of fell apart so famously.
How it became this almost mythical thing.
Right, this lost masterpiece, and how its story is so wrapped up in Brian Wilson's own long journey towards recovering from mental illness.
And get ready, because there are some truly wild details in here. Whispers of a rivalry with the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
Studio sessions involving like sandboxes and animal noises.
Unbelievable.
Moments of really frightening paranoia. And then the surprising things that actually helped Brian Wilson find his way back years down the line.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, set the stage. Brian Wilson's genius. I mean, that was clear early on with the Beach Boys. But something big shifted for him around 1964.
Right, that panic attack on the plane.
Yeah, after that, he just decided no more touring. He wanted to focus completely on the studio.
And that decision was, well, pivotal, wasn't it? He poured all that energy into Pet Sounds, which came out in '66. And the sources are pretty clear this wasn't just another record. It was like a direct response to the Beatles' Rubber Soul. Brian apparently said he wanted to outdo them.
And, in many ways, he did create something revolutionary. Pet Sounds really was a game changer for pop music.
Absolutely. Those sophisticated, almost orchestral arrangements.
It pushed the Beach Boys so far beyond that surf and car image. Suddenly, they were serious musical innovators.
So the reception was interesting, right? In the U.S., it was kind of confusion, lower sales than they expected.
Yeah, fans weren't quite ready, maybe.
But in the UK, huge critical success. They absolutely loved it. And that validation, that warmth from the UK, seems like it really encouraged Wilson to take even bigger risks.
It also felt like a shift in mood, didn't it? The music itself.
Definitely.
One source calls it expressing dislocation and loss of innocence, which, when you think about the mid-'60s.
Yeah, totally. JFK's assassination wasn't that far back. Vietnam was escalating, civil rights turmoil, the counterculture rising.
Sort of tapped into that underlying anxiety, maybe.
It really showed a depth, a vulnerability that I think surprised a lot of people coming from the Beach Boys. And that vulnerability, that ambition, it set the stage for what came next.
Which was supposed to be the follow-up, the incredibly ambitious Smile project.
Smile. This was next level stuff.
His vision was just immense. He called it a teenage symphony to God. Yeah. Not just meant to follow Pet Sounds. It was meant to blow past it, to challenge everything happening in rock, the British invasion. Although, he later kind of downplayed the direct revolver rivalry thing.
Yeah, a key part of this, obviously, was his collaboration with the lyricist Van Dyke Parks.
Right. And their influences were just all over the map.
Totally. Mysticism, classical music, but also ragtime, jazz, doo-wop.
Even experimental stuff like music concrete, using recorded sounds as instruments in cartoons.
It was incredibly diverse, and their recording approach was, well, pretty pioneering for back then.
Definitely. This modular recording idea.
Yeah, recording these little bits, these sections.
Like musical Legos, almost.
Exactly. Little bricks you could splice together later in different ways. It sounds common now, maybe, but back then, conceptually and technically, really tough.
They were messing with acoustics, layering complex sound effects, aiming for these really intricate, almost spiritual vocals. They called it a white spiritual sound.
And they planned things like word paintings, using sounds to paint pictures, and even comedic bits mixed in.
This whole visionary thing, though, led to a recording process that was, well, intense is one word for it.
Intense, yeah, and sometimes just plain eccentric.
Intense might be an understatement, actually. The sources mention over 50 hours of tape.
From more than 80 separate sessions, that's huge.
And Brian's perfectionism.
Yeah.
It became legendary, pushing musicians, even his own bandmates, just relentlessly.
Yeah.
Endless retakes.
Yeah, there's that story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, of a horn player saying, perfect, just one more. After like the 100th take, you can feel the frustration.
And then the eccentricities, the stuff of legend. Building a hot boxing tent in his house.
And installing a sandbox under his grand piano, which apparently cost the equivalent of nearly $300,000 today.
Wow. And talking about wanting to sell organic vegetables from home.
It's interesting, though, because people who were there had different takes on it at the time.
Right. Some saw it as just, rock star weirdness, creative energy.
While others were genuinely worried by his behavior.
You definitely feel the tension in what the bandmates said later.
Yeah.
Bruce Johnston apparently felt degraded being asked to make barnyard noises.
Yeah, and Al Jardine described feeling trapped in an insane asylum sometimes.
Rough.
And Carl Wilson's observation that everyone was just so loaded on pot and hash all of the time.
Brian himself even said later they were too high to finish it properly.
And while, yeah, drug use was part of the scene, the sources do point towards something more specific later on, amphetamine psychosis.
Ah, right. From abusing Disbutal.
Yeah, causing paranoia, distorted reality. That seems to have been a big factor in his state of mind and how he saw the project, how he saw himself.
So this is where it all starts to come undone, isn't it? The ambition, the intensity, the drugs, the behavior, it all converges.
It really does, leading to the project's collapse. And a huge, heartbreaking part of that was Brian's deteriorating mental state.
Which wasn't fully understood at the time, right?
No, not really. Many people close to him didn't see the clear signs then. But he was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, really complex conditions affecting mood, thought, perception.
And the sources detail some really distressing symptoms he was having back then. Severe paranoia.
Yeah, and delusions, like believing the movie Seconds had coded messages just for him.
From Phil Spector and the director, John Frankenheimer. Part of some imagined conspiracy.
Exactly. He was losing trust in people, became incredibly sensitive to any criticism, felt deeply insecure.
And just agonizingly started believing he'd lost his talent. Completely.
Which is just devastating to think about. And on top of that, you had major conflict within the band.
Right. Not everyone was thrilled with this new direction. Mike Love, particularly.
Yeah, he famously questioned Van Dyke Park's lyrics, calling them acid alliteration.
He preferred the old Beach Boys formula, the hits.
Which is understandable from a commercial standpoint, maybe. Though Love later denied his criticism was responsible for what he called Wilson's drug-induced paranoia.
And Brian's father, Murray Wilson, was apparently undermining Brian's collaborations too.
Seems so, working against Parks and others he didn't approve of.
So internal conflict, mental health struggles, and then external pressures piled on too.
Yeah, Carl Wilson got a draft notice. Huge uncertainty there.
The band got sued by Capitol Records.
Van Dyke Parks actually quit the project. Partly creative differences, partly, as he put it, family feuds getting mixed up in the music.
And the whole Beatles shadow thing.
Always looming. There's that famous story about him hearing Strawberry Fields Forever and supposedly feeling like they'd beaten him to the punch.
Although he denied that specific song crushed him later.
Right. But there was another damaging rumor. He apparently believed that someone had shared Smile tapes with the Beatles.
Oh, wow. That made him feel betrayed, raped was the word he used. Fueled the paranoia even more.
It was just a perfect storm, really. A devastating convergence.
So Brian started doubting the whole thing, missed deadlines again and again.
Retreated from the studio, tried managing their new label, Brother Records, instead.
And then just abandoned it. Abandoned the studio, abandoned Smile.
And just like that, it was shelved. And its transformation into the Great Lost Legend began.
So what happened right after? That's key to the myth, isn't it?
Totally. Some bits and pieces, simplified versions of Smile songs, ended up on the album they quickly put together, Smiley Smile.
Which someone later called a bunt instead of a grand slam.
Yep.
Kind of sums it up.
Yeah. And other tracks slowly trickled out on later Beach Boys albums over the years, like 2020, Surf's Up.
But the whole thing, the original vision, it took on this legendary status. Especially when bootlegs started circulating in the 80s.
Right. That was huge. Fans suddenly had these pieces, these fragments, and they started trying to assemble their own versions of what Smile might have been.
So it became this weird kind of interactive project decades after it was abandoned, kept alive by the fans' imagination.
And meanwhile, attempts to release it officially kept failing. Business problems, tape leaks, worries about Brian's health, just the sheer complexity of putting it together.
And Brian himself. He didn't want to talk about it for years, right?
Famously reluctant, often just dismissed it, called it corny drug-influenced music or weird stuff.
You can tell it was tied to a really difficult, painful time for him.
Absolutely. It marked the beginning of this long, really challenging period for him, struggling with severe mental illness for decades.
But, and this is important, The story doesn't end there with the collapse in the lost album. It's also this incredibly powerful story of eventually recovery.
Yes. The sources draw this interesting parallel with John Nash, the mathematician from A Beautiful Mind.
Both reach these incredible creative peaks,
Experienced devastating setbacks linked to severe mental illness.
but ultimately found a way forward.
And their stories really seem to highlight three things that are often crucial for recovery:
Okay, what are those?
supportive relationships, proper treatment, and finding purpose, often through work or some kind of meaningful activity.
Makes sense. For Brian, supportive relationships seem key. Melinda Wilson, his wife.
Widely credited with playing a massive role in his comeback. But it's also a reminder, of how vital parents, siblings, friends, peer support can be for anyone facing these kinds of challenges.
And treatment, too. Medication clearly helped him manage his symptoms.
Yeah, he said himself, absolute. I used to go for long periods without being able to do anything, but now I play every day. It made a huge difference.
Now, we should probably mention the controversial therapist, Eugene Landy.
Right. It's a difficult part of the story. The movie Love and Mercy portrays him pretty frighteningly, focusing on the exploitation and control, which was definitely real and deeply problematic.
But Brian Wilson himself has also said Landy helped him get out of bed and return to life when maybe others had given up.
It's complex, conflicting accounts, a really tough period in his history. No easy answers there.
And the third cornerstone, work, purpose.
Yeah, for Brian, music itself became a lifeline, a way to cope. He talked about dealing with the auditory hallucinations, the voices.
He said he plays instruments all day making music.
Right, and on stage, he'd try to combat the voices by singing really loudly. He also talked about using love, kissing his wife, his kids, trying to focus on love as much as possible.
So creating connecting through music and family, that provided some solace, some respite from the internal struggle.
Exactly, and after all those decades, the struggle, the myth, the legend, the masterpiece finally saw the light of day.
In 2004, first came Brian Wilson Presents Smile, his solo version.
Right, he rearranged it, Van Dyke Parks came back and wrote some new lyrics, he structured it into 3 movements. Brian himself called it substantially different from the 60s plan.
But it was his version finally realized, on his terms.
Then, in 2011, came the big one for many fans, the Smile Sessions.
The original recordings.
Yes, the first official compilation of the actual Beach Boys recordings from '66, '67, assembled to be the closest to possible approximation of the album they planned back then, using those original tapes.
And the reception was incredible, right?
Yeah, universal acclaim, basically. It won the Grammy for Best Historical Album. Finally, those original recordings got their official place in history.
So today, what's the legacy of Smile?
It's immense. It's seen as this landmark artwork. People talk about the harmonic genius, building on pet sounds, but especially those innovative production techniques.
Modular stuff.
Exactly. Things that are just taken for granted now in music production, but they were basically inventing them back then.
There's speculation, isn't there, that if it had come out in '67...
Oh, yeah. Could it have changed everything? Maybe surpassed Adreet Pepper as the album of the era? Maybe even created a whole new genre? We'll never know for sure.
But the impact is undeniable now.
Absolutely. And the legend kind of lives on, evolves. The sources even mention recent fan projects using AI deepfakes to create versions with original vocals.
Wow, really?
Yeah, like a modern twist on that whole interactive project history. Fans still piecing it together.
So when you step back and look at this whole incredible story, Brian Wilson, Smile, what does it all mean? What do we take away?
Well, I think it just powerfully highlights that complex, sometimes devastating link between incredible creativity and severe mental health challenges.
It definitely does. And it also underscores how absolutely vital support systems are.
Yeah, relationships, proper treatment, and having that sense of purpose, whether it's work or something else.
Yeah.
How crucial those can be in recovery and just living with mental illness.
And maybe ultimately it shows the enduring power of art itself, that something so brilliant could survive decades of, well, everything, and finally find its audience.
It's an amazing, almost unbelievable story, which leads to a final thought, maybe.
Okay.
Considering the intense pain, the struggle Brian Wilson went through, especially around Smile and the years after, does the fact that we have this masterpiece now, does its completion somehow redeem all that suffering?
Or does it maybe serve as a stark reminder of the incredibly high price that genius can sometimes demand and just how fragile the human mind can be?
Yeah, something to think about.